Good Shabbos, and welcome to week 3 of the COVID isolation. And I think it's appropriate this week to talk about the theme of Pesach. Pesach is called Zman Cheruseinu, the time of our freedom. This is a time that most people don't feel that free. They feel cooped up and almost imprisoned in their own house, although here I am imprisoned in shul, which might be worse than being imprisoned in your house. And the question is, how do we define freedom? And when you first think about it, it's obvious. You're free to do whatever you want. To go out when you want, to talk to who you want, to eat what you want, to travel where you want, to do any type of risky behavior. That's real freedom. But that freedom is not practical because all of those freedoms have consequences which follow. So for example, in our situation now, sure, you might be free to walk out and engage other people in conversation, but you might be taking a risk which you're really not willing to accept the consequences that follow from your actions. So before we really understand freedom, it probably makes sense to understand the opposite. How do we define slavery? And in Hebrew, the word for slavery is an eved or avdut. Eved could be translated as either as a servant or as a slave. And in the Torah, it doesn't really differentiate between the two. So when you're reading the Torah, for example, we'll say that Moshe is an Eved Hashem, and you say he's a servant of God. And that sounds beautiful. On the other hand, when we say we're Avadim Hayinu L'Pharaoh b'Mitzrayim, we were servants to Pharaoh in Egypt, we weren't servants. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. But in Hebrew, it's the exact same word. So we have to define what does slavery really mean and what's really wrong with slavery. And maybe we could ask what's right with slavery. Why is it okay for Moshe to be a servant or a slave of God? Why does the Torah say you're no longer avadim, slaves to Pharaoh, but avadayim, you are my servants, you're my slaves. You have to worship me. God is speaking in that case. So what does it really mean to be an Eved? What's wrong with being a slave? And is it worse to be a slave to a person or to God or to a system or just to conformity at large? So one way to define slavery is when you have to work at another's command. Okay, you could say if someone makes me do something, if they demand I do it, then that's being a slave. I want to do it when I want. But we know that's what all of life is about. All of life is to follow convention. We have to follow society, the rules of society. Again, in religion, you have to follow the rules of your religion. So most of us don't think that it's so bad to have to work at the command of someone else. So let's change the definition. Maybe slavery is to work for someone else's benefit. Right? It's not just at their command, but it's working for someone else's benefit. Well, that's not so bad. If I have a job working for someone and I make a decent salary and I could live and I could support my family and I could retire and I'm very happy and the employer makes double that money, so I worked for that person's benefit. If I wouldn't have worked, he wouldn't have derived that benefit, perhaps. But I'm still okay with it because without that job, I wouldn't necessarily have my own business. I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to work. I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to feed my family. So that's not necessarily bad to work for somebody else's benefit. There's a rule in the Gemara and the Talmud that says Zen nehna v'zeh lo chaser, to give somebody else enjoyment when you don't lose anything. As you're working anyway for your own benefit, and if it also works for somebody else, then there's no reason to be upset about that and to be jealous of that person or to feel that person is enslaving you. So therefore, it's not necessarily wrong or bad to work for someone else's benefit. Slavery really then is to work for someone else's benefit at the expense of your own benefit, at your own enjoyment, at your own, at the good of yourself. It's really, to be a slave is not to realize your own potential. I have potential to make a good salary. I have potential to be happy. I have potential to be healthy. If I fulfill that potential, I'm not being a slave. The fact that somebody else is telling me to do that doesn't make me a slave necessarily. It doesn't necessarily, or put me in a position of avdus, of slavery. So that's not being a slave. And so therefore, now let's go and define freedom. What does it mean to be, if being a slave means to work at someone else's command for his or her benefit to the detriment of yourself, then freedom is just the opposite of that. Freedom is the ability to reach one's potential. Slavery is not to reach one's potential, and freedom is the ability to reach one's potential. So freedom is not the ability or the freedom to harm oneself, but rather it's to understand yourself, to know who you are, what's good for you, what your goals are, what you stand for, what your life's work should be, and how to attain it. That's what real freedom is. And therefore, a master who is concerned with your benefit is okay. It's a benign master. To have a benign master is not necessarily to be a slave. Yes, you are an eved laHashem. You are a servant, a slave to God. You have to listen to the rules of society. You have to listen to the rules of your community. But ultimately, it's for your benefit. And if it's for your benefit, that is really what we call freedom. So therefore, if you have a master, if your doctor is your master and says, you should not eat such food, certain food, which are high cholesterol. So you say, I feel like I'm a slave to this doctor. I can't stand this doctor. Whenever I go there, he tells me I'm not allowed to eat this, I'm not allowed to eat that. I have to do a certain amount of exercise. I have to sleep a certain amount. I have no freedom. But of course, we know that the doctor is giving you your life. And if freedom is defined as the reaching your potential, that doctor is helping you reach that potential. So therefore, it's quite obvious that being an Eved LaHashem, being a servant or a slave to God, is okay if God is a benign master. If the purpose of the rules are therefore to help you and to make you live your life to its fullest, then that really is the essential notion of freedom. So at this point, I'd like to address the freedom that we have on Pesach itself, because the truth is, Pesach has become a time which is, we can look at it as the most difficult time to be a Jew. We have to turn over our kitchen, we have to restrict our diet, buy different food, perhaps have to buy new pots and pans and silverware, and our life is turns topsy-turvy in order to fulfill the command of the Torah to not to eat chametz. And you might look at that and say, so how does that make me fulfill my potential? And hopefully we could look at this in a way which we really do appreciate what the Torah is really giving us. Because it gives us a week, which I've mentioned other times, gives us a week to focus on what life is really about. Life is not just expressing your needs on a constant basis and just fulfilling every desire that you possibly could have. That really is ego-driven often. And as I've mentioned, many commentaries say that the chametz bread is really ego. Chametz is when something rises up and is bloated, and as I mentioned other times, full of hot air. And as a result of that symbol, the result of understanding that chametz really represents our ego, by having a week or a little bit longer where we only eat matzah, and we're saying we want to act in a humble way. We want to have lechem ani. We want to have poor man's bread. We want to have basics. We want to rid ourselves of our drive for materialistic gain and our seeking constant pleasure. And we start to focus on the simple things in life. So of course I know that it's not simple, Pesach, but really it's trying to get us back to simplicity. Bread, the matzah is simple bread, poor person's bread. And if we focus on that, we could look at the holiday as one which makes us completely realign our direction in order to make sure that we're fulfilling ourselves and fulfilling our potential. So it's a time where we sit with family, and the Seder is a great time to be able to sit down with your family and really say, what's really important to us? What direction should our life take, both as individuals and as a family? Where are we going? What's important to us, and what are our principles? What do we stand for? And hopefully that's just one simple lesson that we could take from the laws of Pesach, which really demand of us to change our lifestyle and turn our house topsy-turvy in order to fulfill the commandment of the Torah. And if we take that lesson to heart, hopefully we will look at even our situation now, where we're all isolated and imprisoned in our own houses, and say, it's not the ideal, just like it's not the ideal to eat matzah all year. We're allowed to eat chametz the rest of the year. We have a right to look forward to certain pleasures in life, and to make sure that we have things which we don't normally have, which are beyond the necessities of life. But it's important for us to take that week or the time that we have now in isolation and try to look at what's important to us. And so in a way, our COVID isolation might be an elongated Pesach. And if we look at it that way, there's much to be gained. I know there's many hardships people are having, whether it's isolation or it's a loss of job, loss of income. These are horrible things that I'm not trying to downplay. But if we at least focus on some of the positive aspects that it can give us, we could walk away growing from this experience, and walk away growing from from Pesach with this experience. And I just wish everybody a happy and kosher Pesach. And also I wish everybody that this isolation and this imprisonment doesn't last that long, or instead of doing harm, it actually does good for you and for your family. And hopefully we'll see each other in the near future.